Before we start this episode, we just need a big whoop, whoop, because in the UK, we've just had the announcement that fertility clinics are going to be able to apply to reopen from the 11th of May. If you're listening to this in real time, that is now. This episode's coming out at the beginning of May. And we are going to be speaking with the HFEA, which is the governing body in the UK, about this, with a bonus episode that should drop tomorrow, May the 5th, if you're listening in real time. If you're listening back, I'm sure you'll find it interesting. Crazy times that we're in. Things changing all the time. And it's just great that we can use the podcast to get the info out to you. On with the show. Kate, do you think that whilst people are in lockdown, they'll be brave enough to do more things like home testing?
I think being in lockdown is an ideal time to do more home testing, because when you're in lockdown, you're kind of in limbo. You don't really have the opportunity to do very much. But actually, what you can do with home testing is find out so much about your fertility and whether you need to start making some changes to lifestyle.
And that's why we're really chuffed to have Medichecks sponsoring the Fertility Podcast. Because whether you're trying to get healthy before getting pregnant or investigating why you've not been getting pregnant, Medichecks has a range of simple home blood tests developed with Kate to help you. Visit medichecks.com to find out more. This series from the Fertility Podcast is talking about miscarriage. With staggering numbers of people affected daily by this, there's still a silence around it, feelings of shame. Along with the grief, there is the physical impact of loss, and we wanted to explore this further over the coming weeks, with a number of conversations from experts as well as people who have been through it.
Unfortunately, there are so many reasons why miscarriage happens, whether it be genetic or placenta problems, infection or long-term health conditions you may suffer from, or sometimes we just don't know. We hope that by talking about it in this way, you will know that there is support and guidance available for you from groups, experts and organisations.
To find out more about the support available, visit thefertilitypodcast.com/miscarriage, where there will be listings to the range of organisations available, as well as all of these episodes. So I'm now going to welcome Jen Coates, who's the Director of Bereavement Support and Volunteering at SANS, which is the UK's stillbirth and neonatal death charity. Welcome, Jen. Lovely to talk with you.
Thank you. Hello. It's good to be here.
We've had a bit of backwards and forwardsing trying to connect, haven't we? And we're speaking during lockdown.
We are, which is challenging. So I'm hoping that there aren't any crazy noises behind me during this.
Oh, don't worry. It's totally acceptable. I've got my door firmly shut. So just in terms of how SANS as a charity is right now, I mean, it's such a challenging time for charities and people are experiencing such an unknown situation. I mean, how are you guys all doing?
I think we're doing really well in terms of pulling together as a team and really focusing on the support aspects. Obviously, as a charity, in ordinary circumstances, we do a lot of campaigning and research and also working with health professionals. But with health professionals' situations changing so dramatically, we're really focusing on how we can support them through this period, in addition to keeping up all our core services in bereavement support, supporting parents who have been bereaved during this time, who've been previously bereaved, and quite a lot at the moment, people in subsequent pregnancies, which is always an incredibly anxious time, as I'm sure you know, and to have the additional strain of COVID and changes within the hospital and changes to antenatal care, that is definitely an area of focus for our support services. But we're pulling together as a team and really focusing on supporting everybody that we possibly can.
Because the whole grief conversation, it's so fragmented now with people being in lockdown and what they have to go through if they are sadly losing people and unable to do their grieving in a normal way. And I suppose, like you say, if there's people already dealing with grief, it's kind of even more intensified, isn't it?
Absolutely. And, it's described as one of the most isolating of griefs, and in now one of the most isolating of circumstances sort of layered on top of that. So it's a really challenging time. And with other types of bereavement happening and anxiety around those that we love who may be at risk, that all adds on to that sort of multi-layered, either anticipatory grief or actual grief that's happening at the moment.
So for people that haven't heard about the work that SANS do to support people, just talk me through, we mentioned a bit of it just before, the different ways that you help people.
Yeah, so we have the most phenomenal network of groups around the country. We have about 100 groups at the moment who are bereaved parents who have been through this experience. And we run face-to-face support meetings, usually with those groups. We train bereaved parents to become befrienders. So there's a fairly intensive training process for them to become a befriender, a period of time after their own loss, to provide that really important peer-to-peer support, I suppose. We have a national helpline, which is also staffed by paid staff, but also who are bereaved parents themselves. So there's that mixture of professional and peer support there. We developed an app, a bereavement support app, in the last couple of years, which has really helped to complement all of our services so that it can be downloaded at any time of the day or night, so that there's that instant access to support for parents who are, and families who are bereaved and just need to know, A, that there's somebody out there, but also to get some of that practical information that you really need straight away when you're in hospital. We also have an online community, which obviously is all peer support, and that's moderated by our bereavement support team. And I think one of the really important things about bereavement support is that it's not just that direct acute support that people need, but it's the ongoing support and different ways that people want to remember their baby. So some parents might want to get really involved in supporting research, for example, and finding out why. Others are keen to influence policymakers, and we have opportunities for people to do that as the voice of bereaved parents across the UK. So there are lots of different ways that we support parents, either immediately or sort of in the years ahead, really, so that they can create a legacy for their baby that is really meaningful for them.
Do you find that people that are going through it, knowing that they're talking to people who have literally walked the path ahead of them, they're more able to talk because of knowing that person totally gets them? Because I know that there's so much around this in terms of shame and feelings that people maybe put on themselves, blame, all these other things, especially if they've been through fertility treatment and this happens. Obviously, if it's a pregnancy loss later, a stillbirth, baby loss, there's such complicated emotions that they can really have these frank and honest conversations with these other bereaved parents.
Absolutely. But I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's really important that people are able to speak to somebody who has been through the experience. But at the time when they need the support, it's really important that that person is able to hold that space for them, and not necessarily to talk about their own experience, but just knowing that that person has had an experience of baby loss of some kind, I think can be very helpful for many people. But I think what's important is that the person who is listening and supporting has the skills to be able to do that and really hold someone in that space to enable them to explore their own grief.
You talked earlier about in hospital, the care, the support that's needed. And there's been conversations I've heard of people not feeling that that was thought about. They were maybe put on the maternity ward, or they were just given a leaflet. Talk me through the way that SANS supports people.
So for many years, SANS has been campaigning and fundraising to provide bereavement suites specifically for this reason in hospitals in every unit around the country. And that's now become part of the national ambition for the health service to have a bereavement suite, which is soundproofed, has a separate entrance and exit where possible, and where parents can spend, those really precious hours with their baby after the baby has died, just to be in that bubble, I suppose, where they can start to create those memories and begin their grieving process and adjust to an incredibly different time that they weren't expecting, but to create a different sort of relationship with their baby. And obviously, with later miscarriage and stillbirth, that is possible to be able to spend time with your baby in that way. And we also work with healthcare professionals to enable them to have the confidence to have those brave conversations, I guess, and give parents the opportunity to talk about their baby, to take hand and footprints where that's possible, and just really to hold that space for them to have that precious time that sets the groundwork, I guess, for their bereavement journey going forward. And if that can be as supportive and helpful as possible, we know that it makes a big difference to the rest of the bereavement journey.
That mention of soundproofing, and that's come up in the conversations that I've had with people, that I think is so key, that like you described it as a bubble, and it almost needs to be this protective bubble, doesn't it? Because there's so much to think about. And I guess the constant education, like you say, to healthcare professionals, because There are so many different ways people react with this, and what one person might have done isn't going to be what another person does. And it's amazing to know that it's all getting through. I love this national ambition that you have in place. And you talked about the pathway, and you talk about it as your national bereavement care pathway, which has to start at that point, doesn't it? It has to be a part of, even if people aren't open to thinking about it, even if they can be signposted towards it, even if they can't take it on. I mean, they can't consume information at that point. It's trying to surround them with it so that when they do look up, it's there for them rather than them having to seek it.
Absolutely. The National Bereavement Care Pathway has been a really positive piece of work and a collaboration with SANS and other charities such as the Miscarriage Association. And it looks at all of the different pathways, medical pathways that women will experience baby loss. It aims to establish the gold standard, I suppose, for care through all of those pathways. And as you say, parents themselves can't focus on what they need. They maybe feel like they need to ask permission for certain things. And the National Bereavement Care Pathway really enables professionals to offer what parents might need, what parents have told us they need at those points, and to provide the best possible care. And it's been adopted by the majority of trusts around the country now, and has been a really positive development. Now, obviously, during this time of COVID, we're supporting professionals now to do the best they possibly can within the pathways and adapt them slightly to fit in with the restrictions at the moment as well. So we're supporting professionals to adapt their practice during this time to make sure that parents still have a really positive experience and supportive experience. So we provide a memory box which has hand and footprint kit and a little heart keyring so that a heart can be left in the baby's hand, and the keyring then is kept with the parent that has the sort of outline of the heart on it. So all of these tiny things can still happen during this COVID crisis. So I think using our memory box can be really helpful in starting those conversations and that journey. But it may be that the time in hospital is a bit shorter, but we're really trying to support and clarify actually with the Royal College of Midwives what is possible and what isn't possible, so that we can provide any additional resources we may need to provide for professionals at this time. But as you can imagine, it's evolving at the moment, and it's all moving quite fast.
And if people are in early pregnancy and there are any kind of indicators that there might be any issues, but they're scared about calling their GP or what have you, because we know that people are holding back, what would your advice be?
Please don't hold back. I think Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer last night, was very clear, saying the NHS is absolutely open and want to be able to support and help people who are having different medical issues outside COVID. And it's vital that if anyone has any concerns about reduced fetal movement, or if they start to bleed in cases of miscarriage, or they just have concerns that they would normally pick up the phone and call a midwife about, or present at A&E, then please pick up the phone and talk to your GP or your midwife in the same way that you would do otherwise. It's really important.
And in terms of people going back to work when that happens, and the support around a loss in the workplace, I don't mean literally, I mean the whole, or, well, sadly, sometimes I'm sure that is conversations that you have to navigate people through. But in terms of people getting time off, time away from work, how that's raised, because there's not really much support in place. There's not that much understanding from employers about this as something that people have to go through. What support and advice does SANS give to people?
We do a lot of work with employers. We've recently developed a consultancy so that employers can approach us to support a colleague when they come back to work on an individual basis, but also so that we can work with them around their HR policies and practices too, so that things are in place beforehand and it feels like a supportive work environment. Obviously, the Parental Leave Act that came into force very recently really highlighted the need for good practice and adequate parental leave around bereavement, and that's been a really positive step. But we work really hard with individuals supporting them on our helpline and with our bereavement support services to get the maternity leave they're entitled to and the support they need around that, but also to work with employers with this consultancy offer to go in and do training, to look over their policies and their procedures around this area. So there's a lot that we can do with employers, and it's a really important area of work. We know that often women don't even mention that they've had miscarriages and just take leave as sick leave. So anything that we can do to raise awareness of the issues around baby loss and how hard it is to return to work, and for partners as well, often they get a lot less leave following miscarriage or stillbirth and neonatal death, and that's really challenging. So our sort of awareness raising campaigns as well, Finding the Words, a couple of years ago we did an animation which just showed somebody returning to the workplace and what a difference it can make to have just colleagues acknowledge your baby and just say, I'm so sorry that it happened, tell me about your baby, in the same way that you would if someone had come back from maternity leave with a baby who had lived.
Oh, I'd love to have a look at that animation, so we'll have to get a link and put it in the show notes for the episode. I'll find it.
It's on the website. So yeah, it's called Finding the Words, and it's really simple and powerful.
And in terms of men and their willingness to talk about how this has affected them, do you get much interaction, or is it predominantly on the female side?
We have worked really hard recently to support men in grief particularly. I mean, obviously, I want to acknowledge that all partnerships aren't heterosexual partnerships, so issues for partners are very different potentially. But men's grief in particular, we've done a lot of work with our Sands United football clubs, which was initiated by a bereaved dad and has grown across the country. We have clubs set up all over the place now, which is fantastic, providing that informal support. And they say that they often don't necessarily talk about their baby loss. They train together, they play matches together in leagues, but just knowing that the other has gone through an experience of baby loss of any kind is really beneficial. But also we obviously acknowledge that not all dads are into football, and there are many other ways that we support men in their grief. We have male staff on our helpline if people particularly want to talk to another man, on our online community. And I think it's just acknowledging the particular challenges that men may have in feeling that they have to protect their partner and answer all the questions and be that buffer when somebody is grieving or has just lost a baby. Working with professionals to make sure that they are talking to the partners of women who have lost babies and not just focusing everything on the mother.
Yeah.
And just really looking at grief as a whole, what are the different aspects of grief rather than labeling them in terms of gender. We know that this can happen during grief, and that may apply to men or women, but also acknowledging that particularly male, potentially traditional sort of feeling of having to be the protector and not allow yourself to talk about your own feelings. And I hope as a society and as an organisation, we're helping to break that down.
And I know from the conversations that we've had on this topic that there's no clear-cut point at which you should grieve. I mean, it's the same obviously with any grief, but I think it's important to highlight again that this can kind of erupt later, much later. Some people totally quash it down and don't process it, and then it can come in later years, and that's still totally valid to reach out for support, isn't it?
So absolutely, bereavement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It lands in lives which have an awful lot of other things going on, which mean that some people can access their grief and start to think about it and process it at that time, and other people just can't, and that's fine. We all grieve in different ways at different times, and we absolutely at SANS support people who are long ago bereaved and who maybe had an incredibly different experience of grief and treatment at hospital as well. We know that, sort of 20, 30 years ago, often people weren't even able to see their baby. They were taken away. They weren't told where they were buried even slightly longer ago. So we also work with charities who help people trace their babies' graves, which is really important. And we often have older women particularly calling their helpline, just talking about their baby and getting support that way. I met somebody at one of our remembrance services a couple of Christmases ago who had never talked about her baby, and she wrote a tag. We write tags and hang them on 2 Christmas trees at this particular service, and she said it was the first time she had written her baby's name and then love from mummy. She'd never called herself mummy before that point, and she was in her 70s. So it just shows how important it is to have services that are available all the way through that grieving process, and sometimes for years afterwards.
Yeah, just put a real lump in my throat then. Thank you, Jen. And as far as people at this point in time reaching out to you, I know you can't encourage them enough to if they need you. And of course, the app's available, which I'll put a link in the show notes. The app's available on all the app stores and Google stores. And I think as far as kind of access, that's a really brilliant way to get different family members as well kind of in the conversation if you're not quite sure how to, isn't it?
Absolutely. And our bereavement support book is downloadable from the website as well in different sections. So you can download the grandparent section or the family sections, going back to work, and pass that on to your employer. There are lots of different ways you can access our services. And we will also send out the book physically. We're still able to send out all of our resources at the moment to people and to hospitals. So that's important to note, I think.
And I know that you've had other bereaved parents write books. I have actually spoken to one lady, Frankie, who's written These Precious Little People. And I know that there's a number of books that you guys kind of champion from parents that people can access to again, get that kind of peer support, don't you?
Absolutely. We've got 3 new books that we're promoting, including Frankie's, which are storybooks to help siblings to understand. And these could be siblings who are aware of the pregnancy, or as they grow older and become aware that there was a baby before them, or that was born when they were too little really to remember. So we've got In the Stars and Where Are You, Liddy, and These Precious Little People as well from Frankie, which explains more the process of how a baby grows and then maybe what happens when a baby dies during pregnancy. So they're really beautifully illustrated, gentle ways of starting conversations with your children. And we know that children puddle jump in and out of grief and their questions. So one minute they might be asking why the baby died, and the next minute they're asking what's for dinner, and that's perfectly normal. And these books are really good ways of just sitting down and maybe having a few minutes with your child if they are asking questions, and starting to explore them in a very non-threatening, supportive way.
And I think with that in mind, because it can catch you so off guard when those questions are raised as a bereaved parent, it's another little bit in your toolkit that you've got literally to hand, isn't it? That you can just be like, okay, I can manage this, rather than fall apart at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And being okay to say, I really want to talk to you about this, but let's talk about it after dinner. And that just gives you time to collect your thoughts and be in a space where you feel that you can explore that with your child. You know, you don't need to answer those questions straight away. I can see this as a really important question for you, but let's talk about it later. Or what do you think about that? You know, I can see you're thinking about it. So there are lots of different ways that we can help parents to support siblings.
Great stuff. Thank you so much, Jen. So many valid pieces of useful information there that I know will be really helpful for people. So I really appreciate you giving me the time, because I know it's busy for you. And I hope that this next kind of phase of coming out of the COVID storm goes as well as it can do.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk to you and to be able to reassure people that the support is still out there.
Thank you, Jen. We know there's probably going to be a lot of information here that has got you thinking, so be sure to visit thefertilitypodcast.com/miscarriage, where we will be listing links to all the different organisations we're mentioning, as well as the different episodes within this series. And of course, you can follow us online. I'm at FertilityPoddy.
And I'm at Your Fertility Journey.
And just remember, we're here, you're so not alone. If this episode has been helpful to you in any way, please do rate, review, subscribe and share, so we can keep the momentum going and help other people find out this podcast, and hopefully help them like it's helped you. Thank you. Until the next time.